The iron chains bit deep into her wrists, each link heavy with the weight of betrayal. Blood, dark and warm, traced slow rivers down her pale forearms, dripping onto the auction block's weathered wood. The stains there were old layered telling stories of countless others who had stood where Isla Thornwell now stood trembling in the torchlight of the shadow market. She kept her eyes fixed on the cavern floor, on the worn stone slick with moisture and decades of despair. If she looked up, she would see the faces. The jeering crowd of rogues and exiles, their eyes gleaming with malice and hunger. If she looked up, she would have to acknowledge that this was real, that her own father had signed the papers, that her own mother had turned her back as the cart rolled away into the mountain night. So Isla looked down, her white hair falling forward like a curtain hiding the mismatched eyes that had marked her as cursed from the moment they had changed color on her 10th birthday. One violet as twilight, one silver as polished steel. Different, wrong, unwanted. The auctioneer, a greasy man named Barlow Grimm, circled her like a vulture assessing carrion. His breath reeked of sour wine and rotting meat. When he reached out and grabbed a fistful of her stark white hair, yanking her head back with casual cruelty, Isla did not cry out. She had learned long ago that screaming in the world of lichens only invited harsher punishment. Silence was survival. Invisibility was safety. Except she had never been invisible. Not with hair like winter snow and eyes that glowed like gemstones in firelight. Behold, Barlow's voice boomed through the underground cavern, echoing off stalactites that hung from the ceiling like stone fangs. An anomaly of the bloodlines. A purebred born to Lord Silas Thornwell of the Thornvale territory, yet she stands before you hollow, empty. No wolf, no bite, no beast to call her own. The crowd pressed closer, a mass of unwashed bodies and wet fur. The shadow market existed in the depths beneath Montana's Iron Ridge neutral territory, where all packs could gather to trade, to gamble, to conduct business too dark for daylight. The air hung thick with the stench of rust and torch smoke, sweat, and desperation. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady rhythm like a dying heartbeat. 20 years old and still as human as the day she was born. Barlow continued, his grip tightening in her hair. But look at her, gentlemen. Look at this curiosity. White as winter itself, eyes like something from a fever dream. She won't fight back, won't talk back. 20 years of knowing her place has broken her gentle as a lamb. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and sharp. Isla felt something crack inside her chest, a sensation she had felt before. Not her ribs breaking, not her heart, which had shattered so many times it barely existed anymore. This was different. This was the final severing of the thread that had once connected her to hope, to the desperate childish belief that someday, somehow, her parents would look at her and see something worth loving. That thread snapped clean. Barlow released her hair and stepped back, raising his arms to the crowd. She's perfect for labor. Strong back, good teeth, young enough to last decades in the mines or the kitchens. Or perhaps for those with more refined tastes, she'd make an excellent conversation piece for your grand halls. A living curiosity. The null daughter of nobility fallen to her proper station at last. The bidding started at 5 copper pieces. 5 copper, less than the cost of a decent meal, less than a horse, less than a hunting dog. Isla's throat constricted, but she swallowed the sound that tried to escape. She would not give them the satisfaction of her pain. She had survived 20 years in her parents' house as a ghost, a shame they hid in back corridors and locked rooms. She would survive this too. She would endure. She always endured. 10 copper psalm, a voice called from the back. 12, another answered bored. 15 for the freak, a woman laughed. My children could use entertainment. The numbers climbed slowly, insultingly low. 20 copper, 25, 30, less than the cost of the chains that bound her. Then a new voice cut through the din, sharp and arrogant and sickeningly familiar. 50 gold pieces. The cavern fell silent. Isla's head snapped up before she could stop herself, and there, pushing through the crowd of filthy rogues and low-born wolves, was Lord Aldrich Crow. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, his smile predatory and cold. She recognized him instantly. He had visited Thornvale 3 times over the past 2 years, sitting at her father's table, drinking her father's wine, discussing territory disputes and gambling debts, while his eyes tracked her across the dining hall like she was prey. He looked at her now with that same calculating hunger, and Isla felt ice flood her veins. 50 gold pieces, Aldrich repeated, tossing a heavy leather pouch onto Barlow's table with a dull thud. The sound echoed through the silent cavern like a death knell. I need fresh prey for my autumn hunting games. The Thornwell reject should provide excellent sport for my hounds. They do love a good chase. Memory slammed into Isla with physical force. Aldrich Crow sitting across from her father 6 months ago, describing in vivid detail how he liked to hunt. Not deer, not elk. People. Rogues who broke pack law. Criminals. Nulls who had nowhere to run and no one to protect them. He turned them loose in the forests of his territory and set his wolf pack after them, laying bets on how long each one would last. The longest had survived 4 hours before the hounds brought him down. 50 gold. Barlow's voice cracked with greed, his eyes bulging. 50 gold pieces for the reject going once to Lord Aldrich Crow of Crestfall territory. This was how she would die then, not old and forgotten in some back room of her parents' estate, not working herself to death in mines or kitchens. She would die screaming in a forest while wolves tore her apart for sport, and Aldrich Crow would stand in his fine clothes drinking wine and laughing with his friends as they wagered on which hound would reach her first. Going twice to Lord Crow, the temperature plummeted. It was not a gradual chill, the slow creep of evening cold seeping through stone. This was instantaneous, absolute, a bone-deep freeze that turned breath to fog and coated the iron bars of nearby cages with a thin crystalline layer of frost. The torches lining the cavern walls flickered wildly, their orange flames shifting to an eerie, ghostly blue. The crowd's raucous energy died in a single collective breath. Footsteps echoed through the sudden silence. Slow, methodical, heavy as the tread of mountains. The crowd parted like water before a ship's prow bodies pressing against the damp cavern walls, desperate not to touch whoever approached. Isla could see them trembling, could smell their fear rising sharp and acrid above the usual stench of the shadow market. And then he stepped into the clearing before the auction block. He stood well over 6.5 feet tall, a giant of a man wrapped in layers of thick furs. Direwolf pelts draped his massive shoulders, their silver-gray heads, still attached jaws frozen in eternal snarls. Beneath those, the dark brown hide of grizzly bears, and beneath that, the spotted white coat of a snow leopard. His armor was visible through gaps in the beige dark steel, etched with patterns that seemed to shift in the torchlight, ancient runes from the old packs, from the time before territories were drawn and treaties signed. But it was not his size or his furs or his armor that stole the breath from Isla's lungs. His hair fell to his shoulders in a cascade of pure white, as stark and pale as her own. His skin held the translucent quality of fine porcelain, almost luminous in the blue torchlight. And his eyes, when he lifted his head to survey the auction block, burned crimson as fresh blood, as hot coals as the heart of a dying star. Whispers erupted through the crowd, terrified hisses barely louder than breath. The ghost of the north. The Winter Wolf. King Cain. Cain Wolfe, it's him. It's really him. Isla had heard the stories. Every wolf in North America had heard the stories. The albino king who ruled the Frostcrown mountains of northern Montana with an iron fist and a reputation soaked in blood. They said he had been born cursed, an outcast, even among outcasts, that he had killed his way to the throne of the most brutal territory in the realm at the age of 23. They said he was merciless, that he fed his enemies to glaciers, that he could freeze a wolf's blood in their veins with a glance. They said he was a monster. Aldrich Crow puffed out his chest, but Isla saw his hands tremble as he forced authority into his voice. Frostcrown is 300 miles north, King Cain. This merchandise has been claimed. You dishonor my bid. Cain Wolfe did not look at Aldrich. His head remained tilted slightly toward the auction block and toward Isla, and she realized with a strange detachment that he was not actually looking at her. His gaze fixed on a point just over her left shoulder, unfocused, distant, but his chest expanded slowly, deliberately, drawing in a long breath through his nose. He was scenting the air, scenting her. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like an avalanche in the deep places of the earth, vibrating through the stone beneath Isla's bare feet. 200 gold. The cavern exploded with gasps and shouts. 200 gold was a fortune. 200 gold could buy a small territory, could fund an army, could change the balance of power between packs. 200 gold for a null, for a worthless outcast with no wolf and no future, was insanity. Aldrich's face turned purple, veins bulging in his neck. This is an insult. She's a hollow shell, a worthless null. You mock my claim, Wolf. You... The pressure hit the room like a physical blow. Isla had felt alpha aura before the weight of dominance that powerful lichens could project. Her father had a weak version of it, enough to cow servants and omega wolves. Aldrich possessed a stronger variant, enough to make lesser wolves bow their heads and bare their throats. What Cain Wolfe unleashed was something else entirely. It slammed into the cavern like a tsunami of pure primal power. The weaker wolves in the crowd dropped instantly to their knees, choking their bodies forced into submission by instinct older than thought. Aldrich stumbled backward, his bravado crumbling his hand, clutching his throat as though invisible fingers squeezed his windpipe. Cain finally turned his massive head toward the Lord of Crestfall. The movement was slow, almost lazy, and somehow that made it more terrifying. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to barely more than a whisper, but it carried through the frozen silence with perfect clarity. Your claim is dust. Aldrich fell to one knee, gasping. Cain Wolfe turned back toward the auction block and began walking forward. 3 steps brought him to the wooden platform's edge. The crowd shrank away, pressed against walls and pillars, desperate to put distance between themselves and the Winter King. Isla stood paralyzed, her heart pounding like a war drum. He was going to kill her. He had to be. You did not pay 200 gold for something you intended to treat gently. You did not emanate that kind of power, that kind of barely leashed violence, if you had mercy in your heart. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his body, could see the network of scars crossing his hands and knuckles, the marks of a warrior who had fought with fists and claws and teeth. Close enough that she could see his eyes. Eyes were not just crimson, but held a strange milky quality, a glaze that caught the torchlight oddly. He reached out with one massive gauntleted hand and gripped the iron chain that bound her to the wooden post. The chain was thick as her wrist, forged to hold lichens 10 times stronger than any human. He yanked. The metal snapped like dry kindling, the sound sharp as breaking bones. Pieces of shattered chain clattered to the wooden platform, and suddenly Isla's wrists were free, the manacles still circling them, but no longer tethering her to anything. She flinched, every muscle in her body tensing, waiting for the blow that would surely come. Waiting for him to grab her by the hair, as Barlow had done to drag her like livestock, till his scarred fingers hovered an inch from her cheek. Just hovered there, not touching, not grabbing, the heat of his skin radiating against her face. She could feel the restraint in that gesture, the conscious choice not to make contact, and something about it shocked her more than any violence could have. I'll take her, he growled. The sound vibrated through her chest, through the auction block, through the stone floor of the shadow market itself. It was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute finality of a decision made and a fact established. There would be no argument, no negotiation, no debate. Before she could process what was happening, he moved. His hands went to the clasps of the massive outer cloak he wore, the one made of black bear fur that must have weighed 40 pounds or more. He unfastened it with practiced efficiency, and in one smooth motion draped it over Isla's shivering shoulders. The weight of it nearly buckled her knees. The fur enveloped her completely, swallowing her small frame in its mass, and with it came warmth. Real warmth, not the fever heat of panic or the false comfort of denial, but genuine warmth that sank into her frozen skin and trembling muscles. The cloak smelled of pine forests and fresh snow, of ancient mountains, and something bald and indefinable that made her hindbrain recognize predator, apex predator run. But beneath that, woven through it, was something else, something that smelled like safety. Isla's hands came up automatically to clutch the fur closed around her throat, and she looked up at Cain Wolfe's face, trying to understand, trying to make sense of any of this. Why would a monster wrap his cloak around prey? Why would he pay a fortune for something worthless? His crimson eyes were already moving away from her, turning back to the crowd, to Barlow, to the assembled mass of stunned onlookers. He did not explain, did not speak again. He simply turned on his heel and began walking toward the cavern's exit, his footsteps heavy and certain. Isla stood frozen for 3 heartbeats before she understood. He expected her to follow. This was not a request. It was not a discussion. It was a fact as simple and inevitable as gravity. She followed. Her legs shook with every step, weak from days of starvation and fear, but she forced them to move. The cloak dragged on the ground behind her, a train of fur and warmth that felt absurdly out of place in this cavern of horrors. As she passed through the parted crowd, she saw their faces, saw the shock and confusion and, in some cases, pity. Better the devil you know than the monster you don't, their eyes seemed to say. Aldrich Crow was still on his knees, still gasping, but as she passed him, he managed to raise his head enough to snarl at Cain's retreating back. This isn't over, Wolf. The Thornwells will march on Frostcrown for this. You've bought yourself a war along with that worthless null. Cain did not even glance back. They climbed the rough-hewn stairs cut into the cavern wall, up and up through the darkness, through passages lit by guttering torches that barely pushed back the shadows. Isla's breath came in ragged gasps, her lungs burning with effort, but Cain's pace never slowed, never adjusted for her, struggling to keep up. He simply walked steady and inexorable as the glaciers advanced, and she followed because the alternative was to be left behind in the dark. They emerged into the night air, and the cold hit Isla like a slap. The shadow market existed in the depths of Iron Ridge, and the mountain pass above was already deep into autumn's grip. The temperature hovered well below freezing, and fresh snow covered the ground in a pristine white blanket that crunched beneath their feet. A dozen riders waited in the clearing, mounted on massive war horses whose breaths steamed in the frigid air. These were Cain's men, she realized, his guards. They wore armor similar to his dark steel and fur, and they watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Cain walked directly to the largest horse, a black destrier that stood at least 17 hands high, its eyes rolling white as its master approached. He swung into the saddle with effortless grace, despite his size, then without warning, reached down and wrapped his hands around Isla's waist. She barely had time to gasp before he lifted her one-handed as though she weighed nothing at all and set her on the saddle in front of him. His arm came around her waist immediately, locking her in place against his chest, and then he was turning the horse north toward the mountain peaks that jutted against the star-filled sky like the broken teeth of gods. They rode into the darkness, and Isla Thornwell felt the last threads connecting her to her old life snap and fall away like ash on the wind. The memories came unbidden as they rode flooding back with the clarity of fresh wounds. She had been 5 years old during her first shift ceremony. The full moon had hung fat and silver in the autumn sky, and all the children of Thornvale between the ages of 4 and 6 had been gathered in the ceremonial grounds behind the great manor. Isla remembered standing in the grass, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides, watching as one by one her peers began to change. The transformations were beautiful and terrible all at once. Bones cracking and reforming skin splitting to reveal fur, cries of pain giving way to howls of triumph. Within an hour, the ceremonial grounds had been full of wolf pups, tumbling over each other, playing and yipping, their human parents watching with pride and joy. Isla had stood alone in the center of the field, shivering, waiting for the change that never came. She remembered closing her eyes so tight they hurt, remembered praying to the moon goddess with every ounce of desperate faith a 5-year-old could muster. Please, please let me shift. Please let me be normal. Nothing happened. When she finally opened her eyes, her father stood before her. Lord Silas Thornwell, tall and proud, his face a mask she could not read. For one beautiful, fragile moment, she thought she saw hope in his eyes. Hope that maybe she was just a late bloomer, that maybe next month, next year. Then his expression shifted. Hope crystallized into disappointment, hardened into disgust. He turned away from her without a word and walked back toward the manor, leaving her standing alone under the mocking moon. Her mother, Lady Margot, had not even bothered to attend. That was the first time Isla understood she was broken. On her 10th birthday, her white hair had begun growing and replacing the auburn she had been born with. Within weeks, it was completely transformed, stark as fresh snow, impossible to hide or ignore. And then her eyes had changed. The rich brown her mother had once called beautiful faded to violet in her left eye, to gleaming silver in her right. Isla had overheard the servants whispering, cursed, demon-touched. Some said her mother must have lain with a dark creature during pregnancy. Others claimed she was punishment for Lord Silas's pride. Lady Margot had hired every healer within 200 miles, demanding they fix her daughter, cure her, make her normal. The healers had examined Isla, poked and prodded her, drawn her blood, and studied her eyes and hair, and every single one had given the same answer. There is nothing wrong with her. She is simply different. Different was not acceptable in the Thornwell household. By 15, Isla had perfected the art of invisibility. She kept to her tower room, took her meals alone, avoided public spaces when family or guests were present. She had a younger brother by then, Edmund, who had shifted perfectly at age 4 and possessed all the strength and dominance their parents had hoped for. He was the golden child, the true heir, everything Isla could never be. She remembered one particular dinner when Edmund was 12 and she was 17. It had been a formal affair celebrating some business success of her father's, and servants had been instructed to set a place for Isla at the far end of the table, half hidden behind a decorative pillar. She had sat there through 7 courses, watching her family laugh and talk, watching her father ruffle Edmund's hair with pride, watching her mother beam with joy at her perfect son. Edmund had looked down the table at her once, his young face already learning cruelty from their parents' example. At least they got one real wolf, he had said loud enough for everyone to hear. No one had contradicted him. Her father had actually smiled. At 18, Isla had overheard a conversation that killed the last shred of hope she had been clinging to. She had been in the library reading in a corner where no one ever looked when her mother and several ladies of the court had entered for afternoon tea. "Such a shame about your daughter," one of the ladies had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I try not to think of her," Lady Margot had replied, and Isla had heard the teacup clink against its saucer. "In my mind, Edmund is my only child. The other one, if only she had died in childbirth, I could have tried again. I could have had another daughter, a real one. But no, she survived, and having her around is a constant reminder of my failure to produce two perfect children." The ladies had murmured understanding. Someone had changed the subject. The conversation had moved on. Isla had sat in her corner, a book open in her lap. She could no longer see through tears and felt something fundamental break inside her chest. The change had come 2 months ago. Her father had lost spectacularly at cards to Lord Aldrich Crowe, compounding already existing debts from a territorial dispute over timber rights in the eastern forest. 50 gold pieces and a land concession, or face Aldrich's army marching across their borders. Isla had been in the hallway outside her father's study when she heard them discussing options. She had not meant to eavesdrop, had simply been passing by, but her father's voice had been raised in frustration, and the words had carried clearly through the heavy oak door. "We could liquidate the eastern timber holdings," her father had said. "Take the loss, now pay the debt, avoid war. Those forests represent a quarter of our annual income," her mother had replied, her tone practical and cold. "We'd be crippled financially for years." A long silence. Then her father spoke again, and his voice held a new quality, something that made Isla's blood run cold even before she understood why. "We could sell her." "The timber." "No, the girl, Isla. Aldrich mentioned he has use for nulls, hunting prey, entertainment. He'd pay the debt in full, and we'd be rid of the embarrassment she causes us." Another silence, longer this time. Isla had pressed her hand against the wall to keep from falling, her legs suddenly weak. "The timber has value," her mother finally said. "She doesn't. Sell the freak." 3 days later, her father's guards had come to her room in the night. No explanation, no trial, no chance to plead her case or ask why, or even say goodbye to the few servants who had shown her kindness over the years. They had simply dragged her from her bed, thrown her into the back of a cart wearing nothing but a thin shift, and driven her into the mountains. The last thing she had seen of Thornvale Manor was her mother standing on the stone balcony of the master bedroom, watching the cart roll away. Isla had looked up at her, one final desperate plea for connection, for acknowledgement, for some sign that she mattered even a little. Lady Margot had turned her back and walked inside, closing the balcony doors behind her. That image had burned itself into Isla's mind with perfect clarity, her mother's back turning away, the doors closing, the light going out. They had sold her for being different, for having white hair and strange eyes and no wolf to call her own. They had sold her for existing, for reminding them daily that perfection was an illusion and bloodlines could fail. They had sold her for 50 gold pieces and the chance to erase a stain from their perfect family portrait. The memories faded as the horse beneath her stumbled slightly on loose stone, jolting her back to the present. She did not know how long they had been riding, hours certainly. The moon had moved significantly across the sky, and the landscape had transformed from the rocky passes around Iron Ridge to the deeper wilderness of the Montana Rockies. The cold had intensified. Isla's breath came out in clouds of white vapor, and even wrapped in Cain's massive cloak, she shivered. But she noticed something strange. Every time her body began to shake more violently, the arm around her waist would tighten, fractionally pulling her more securely against the solid warmth of his chest. His body heat radiated through the layers of fur and armor, a furnace against her back. He had not spoken a single word since leaving the Shadow Market, had not asked her name, had not explained his intentions, had not acknowledged her presence beyond the physical necessity of keeping her in the saddle. And yet there was something in the way he adjusted his grip when the terrain grew rough, the way he angled his body to shield her from the worst of the wind, that spoke of a care she did not understand. Why would a monster be gentle with his prey? They crested a ridge as dawn began to break, pale gray light seeping across the eastern horizon, and Isla saw the rest of Cain's guard for the first time. A dozen riders as she had thought, but in the growing light she could make out their faces, their equipment, the weapons strapped to saddles and backs. These were not common soldiers. These were elite warriors, every one of them emanating the kind of controlled violence that came from decades of survival in the harshest conditions. One of them, a man with lieutenant's markings on his armor, guided his horse closer to Cain's. He was younger than his king, perhaps 30, with dark hair and sharp features that suggested intelligence alongside strength. "My lord," the lieutenant said quietly, "we should stop for camp. The men are tired, and the horses need rest." Cain's response rumbled through his chest. "Another hour. There is a sheltered valley ahead." "Yes, my lord." The lieutenant started to turn his horse away, then paused, his eyes flicking to Isla. His expression was carefully neutral, but she saw the question in his gaze. "Rowan," Cain said, and the lieutenant's attention snapped back to his king. "She is under my direct protection. Make sure every member of this guard understands that clearly. Her safety is absolute." The lieutenant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he bowed his head. "As you command." The hour passed in continued silence. True to Cain's word, they descended into a valley sheltered on three sides by sheer rock faces with a small stream running through its center. The sky had brightened to full dawn by the time they dismounted, gray clouds promising snow before nightfall. Isla's legs nearly gave out when Cain lifted her down from the saddle. She had been sitting for so many hours that her muscles had locked, and the sudden return of her full weight to her feet sent jolts of pain up her calves and thighs. She stumbled, and his hand shot out to steady her, gripping her elbow until she found her balance. "Careful," he said. The first word he had spoken directly to her, and his voice was somehow different when not addressing his men or projecting authority across a crowd. Quieter, almost if she did not know better, concerned. The guards moved with practiced efficiency, setting up a camp that spoke of long experience with harsh conditions. Tents went up in minutes, a fire was built and lit, and a perimeter was established with guards rotating on watch. One tent, larger than the others and set apart at the valley's far end, was clearly meant for Cain. Another, smaller but still far nicer than Isla had expected, was erected beside it. A woman approached, older, perhaps 50, with silver threading through dark hair and kind eyes set in a weathered face. She carried blankets and what looked like medical supplies. "I am Mira," the woman said, her voice warm despite the cold. "The king's healer. He asked me to tend your wrists." Isla looked down and saw that the manacles were still locked around her wrists, the broken chains dangling uselessly. The iron had rubbed her skin raw, and dried blood crusted the wounds. Mira guided her to a seat near the fire and began working on the manacles with tools from her pack. "These are simple locks, thank the goddess. I will have you free in moments." "You think why?" Isla asked, her voice rough from disuse. "Why what, child? Why does he care about my wrists? About any of this? I am nothing, a null. He paid a fortune for—" "You are not worthless," Mira interrupted firmly, and there was steel beneath the kindness in her tone. "King Cain does not make mistakes. If he bought you, if he claimed your protection, there is a reason. Trust that." The manacles fell away, and Mira began cleaning the wounds with water warmed by the fire. Isla watched the healer work, trying to reconcile this gentle care with everything she thought she knew about the Winter King. "How long until we reach Frostcrown?" Isla asked. 3 days if the weather holds. 4 if it snows, which it will." Mira applied salve to the wounds, her touch expert and sure. "The mountains do not give up passage easily this time of year." Mira finished bandaging her wrists and handed her a water skin and a portion of dried meat. "Eat, rest. The king wants you healthy." As night fell and the snow began to dust the valley in fresh white, Isla lay in her tent wrapped in furs that smelled like pine in winter. And beneath it all, just barely audible, the sound of footsteps outside her tent. Heavy, steady, pacing a slow perimeter. She cracked open the tent flap and looked out. Cain Wolfe stood in the falling snow, his back to her tent, arms crossed over his massive chest. He was not sleeping in his own tent. He was standing guard. Over her, Isla closed the flap and lay back down, her mind spinning with questions she had no answers for. Eventually, impossibly, she slept, and for the first time in 20 years, she slept without nightmares. The journey to Frostcrown took 4 days. 4 days of riding through mountain passes where the snow fell in curtains, so thick Isla could barely see the horse's head in front of her. 4 days of temperatures that dropped so low her breath froze in her lungs. 4 days of climbing higher and higher into the Montana Rockies, where the air grew thin and the peaks pierced the sky like the broken bones of the earth itself. And through it all, Cain Wolfe never left her side. He did not speak to her beyond brief instructions. "Drink this. Eat. Hold tighter when we descend." But his actions told a story his words did not. When the blizzard hit on the second day and Isla's body began to shake violently, he removed his second cloak and wrapped it around her, layering fur upon fur until she was cocooned in warmth. When they stopped to make camp each night, he ensured she received the best cuts of dried venison, the warmest position by the fire, the driest tent. On the 4th morning, the clouds parted. Isla looked up from her position in front of Cain on the massive destrier and saw it. The Frostcrown citadel rose from the side of a glacier like something carved by gods instead of men. Towers of dark stone and enchanted ice stretched toward the sky, their foundations buried in ice so ancient it glowed blue even in daylight. The fortress was enormous, easily spanning 500,000 square feet built into and onto the glacier itself. Below the citadel, a vast valley opened, sheltered by the surrounding peaks. Isla could see buildings, roads, training grounds, and markets. Thousands of people lived down there, a city built in the shadow of their king's frozen palace. Frostcrown, Cain said behind her, and she felt the word rumble through his chest. Home. They rode through the valley, and Isla watched the city come to life around them. Wolves in human form going about their business, children playing in the snow, merchants hawking wares. It looked almost normal, almost peaceful. But as they began the ascent to the citadel itself, the temperature dropped again, and something changed. The air itself felt heavier here, saturated with old power, old magic. The main gate stood 30 feet tall, solid iron etched with runes that glowed faintly blue. As they approached, the gate swung open silently, and they rode into the courtyard of Frostcrown's citadel. 300 wolves stopped what they were doing and stared. The silence was absolute. Warriors paused mid-training, servants froze with loads of laundry or firewood. Every eye in the courtyard fixed not on their returning king, but on the small white-haired woman wrapped in his furs sitting in front of him on his horse. Isla heard the whisper start. Aisha. Another albino. Look at her eyes. She's human. Why would the king bring a null here? Cain dismounted with fluid grace, then reached up to lift Isla down. His hands circled her waist completely, and he set her gently on the icy cobblestones. The gesture sent a fresh wave of whispers through the assembled crowd. A man approached from the direction of the main keep. He was tall, perhaps 34, with dark hair and amber eyes that held a sharp intelligence. A jagged scar ran from his throat to his collarbone. He wore the markings of a beta second in command. My king, the man said, dropping to one knee, you returned victorious. But I see you bring back more than battle reports. Cain's hand remained on Isla's shoulder. Dravenstone, this is Isla Thornwell of the Thornvale territory. She is under my direct protection. Have the East Wing chambers prepared for her. Draven's eyes narrowed as they swept over Isla. Thornwell, the Southern Pack. His voice hardened. Lord Silas Thornwell's territory. Yes, and she is a null. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with barely concealed disdain. She is under my protection, Cain repeated. Ensure the healers attend to her. Her safety is absolute, Draven. Make certain every wolf in this citadel understands that clearly. Draven rose to his feet, his posture rigid. Of course, my king. Cain turned to Isla. You will be safe here. No one will harm you. Before Isla could respond, he released her shoulder and strode toward the keep, his guards falling into formation behind him, all except Dravenstone. The beta approached her slowly, his amber eyes cold. When he spoke, his voice was pitched low. I do not know what game you are playing, Thornwell, or what lies you told our king, but I will be watching you. And when you reveal your true purpose, when you prove yourself the liability I know you are, I will be there to remove you. Permanently. He straightened. Follow me. I will show you to your chambers. Isla followed her legs, shaking her mind, reeling from the venom in his words. The East Wing chambers were more luxurious than any room Isla had ever occupied. The suite consisted of 3 rooms, a bedroom, dominated by an enormous 4-poster bed draped in wolf furs, a sitting room with a fireplace, and a private bathing room with a copper tub and running hot water. The king wants you comfortable, Draven said, his tone making comfort sound like an accusation. Servants will bring you clothing, meals will be delivered. He left without another word. A knock at the door made her jump. Come in, she called. The woman who entered was Mira, carrying an armload of fabric and a warm smile. I thought you might want help getting settled, child. I have brought you some proper dresses. Over the next hour, Mira helped Isla wash away 4 days of road dirt and dressed her in a gown of deep forest green wool lined with fox fur. When Isla looked at herself in the polished silver mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. You look like you belong here, Mira said softly. Chose me for what? Isla asked. I don't understand any of this. Mira's expression grew thoughtful. King Cain has ruled Frostcrown for 8 years. In all that time, I have never known him to make an impulsive decision. If he brought you here, there is a reason. Draven doesn't think so. He thinks I'm a spy or... Draven loved someone once, Mira interrupted gently. Her name was Lysa. She was his mate, his wife carrying his first child. 8 years ago, there was a raid. Southern pack wolves crossed into our territory, burned 3 villages, killed 42 of our people. Lisa was among the dead. The healer's voice grew sad. Draven has hated the southern territories ever since. You coming from Thornvale representing everything he lost. He will not be your friend child, but he will obey the king's command. After Mira left, Isla tried to rest, but sleep would not come. As evening approached, a servant brought her dinner, roasted venison, fresh bread, winter vegetables, and wine. She ate alone in her chambers, watching the snow fall outside her window. 3 days later, a guard's voice came through her door. The king requires your presence in his private study. Follow me. Isla's heart hammered as she followed the guard through corridors of dark stone and ice, up winding stairs, through halls hung with ancient tapestries. The citadel was a maze deliberately designed to confuse invaders. They stopped before a heavy oak door bound in iron. The guard knocked once, then opened it and gestured for her to enter. The study was smaller than she expected, warmer. A fire roared in the hearth and the walls were lined with bookshelves. Maps covered a large table in the center, and standing by the window, his back to the door, was Cain. Set the ledgers on the desk, he said without turning around. Isla froze. She carried no ledgers. Her hands were empty. Your Grace, I don't have any. Set the books on the desk, Isla. She stared at his back, confusion blooming into something else. He had spoken her name. He knew it was her entering, despite not turning, despite no announcement. How slowly, carefully she began walking toward the desk. Her soft leather shoes made barely a whisper against the thick carpets. Your heartbeat races whenever you're near me, Cain said, still not turning. And your scent, lavender from the soap Mira gave you, old parchment from the books in your chamber, and underneath it all, fear. Always fear. Isla stopped moving, stopped breathing, because she understood now. You're not looking at me, she whispered. Cain finally turned and she saw it clearly. His crimson eyes were magnificent, terrifying, beautiful. But they did not quite focus on her face. His gaze fixed on a point just over her left shoulder. No, he agreed quietly. I am not. Why? A bitter smile touched his lips. The curse of the albino wolf, my beast, my wolf form sees perfectly in darkness, tracks blood across 10 miles of snow. But in this skin, in my human form, light is a blinding fog. I am all but blind, little bird. The words hit Isla like a physical blow. The Winter King, the most feared alpha in the realm, was blind. If rival alphas knew, they would march on Frostcrown tomorrow. Cain finished for her. He walked toward her slowly, his movements fluid, despite his admission. You are the 4th person to know this secret, Isla Thornwell. Mira knows because she is my healer. Draven knows because he saved my life once when my blindness nearly cost me everything in battle. And now you know. He stopped directly in front of her. His hand came up slowly and his scarred fingers came to rest against her cheek. He was seeing her through touch. I bought you because my wolf went insane the moment you entered that cavern, he said, his voice dropping to barely more than a rumble. Demanded you, raged when I tried to leave without you. I have been alpha for 8 years and never once has my beast overridden my logic. But for you, it was willing to start a war. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. Tell me, why did my wolf claim you? What are you that my beast knew something my blind eyes could not see? I don't know, Isla whispered. I'm nothing. I've spent 20 years being nothing. Cain's hand fell away. There is a reason you were born without a wolf. There is a reason my beast recognized you, and I intend to discover what it is. Isla stood in the center of his study, her mind reeling. He had trusted her with a secret that could destroy him. I should go, she said finally. Wait. Cain did not turn, but his voice held command. I have a task for you if you are willing. My beta has assigned you work sorting through the archives beneath the citadel. But those archives contain knowledge. Histories of the Pack's lineages, records going back 500 years. If there are answers about what you are, they will be there. He turned his head slightly. Will you search for the truth of yourself? Isla thought about 20 years of being told she was broken, cursed, worthless. And she thought about this man, this king who saw her as something worth protecting, worth trusting with his most dangerous secret. Yes, she said, I'll look. Over the next 2 weeks, Isla descended into the archives every morning and did not emerge until evening. The catacombs beneath Frostcrown Citadel were vast, a labyrinth of stone corridors and chambers carved deep into the glacier's foundation. The air hung cold and still, and the only light came from the candles she brought. Draven had assigned the task expecting her to fail. Instead, Isla threw herself into the work with intensity. She cataloged ledgers, organized scrolls, created systems of reference, and she searched. At first, she looked for references to nulls. She found a few scattered mentions most dismissive. Genetic dead ends, failures of the bloodline. Then she began looking for patterns in the bloodlines themselves, tracing family trees back through generations. On the 16th day, she found something. It was a tome bound in iron locked with a seal that had rusted through. The title etched into the metal cover in old lichen script read, "The First Bloodlines." Isla's hand shook as she pried the lock free and opened the book. The parchment was so old it crackled beneath her fingers, and the illustration on the third page made her breath stop. It was a drawing of a woman. The woman had stark white hair that fell past her shoulders. Her face was beautiful and terrible all at once, and her eyes, one violet as twilight, one silver as starlight, exactly like Isla's own. Her hands shaking, Isla read the text beneath the illustration. They are not empty, they are vessels. The nulls of the mismatched gaze carry no beast, for they are anchors of the goddess herself. True oracles born once in 5 centuries, capable of mending the fractured minds of feral alphas or shattering the bloodlines of those who seek ruin. To harm one is to invite famine upon the land. To love one is to conquer death itself. They are marked by hair white as winter's heart, and eyes that hold the colors of power, violet for vision, silver for truth, gold for justice, crimson for war. They come when the balance tips, when the packs forget the old laws, when strength without wisdom threatens to destroy all. They are the goddess's correction, her mercy and her wrath in mortal flesh. Isla read the passage 3 times, 4 times. She was not cursed. She was not broken. She was an oracle. A genetic miracle unseen in 500 years, carrying power her parents could never have imagined when they sold her for 50 gold pieces. She turned the page and found more. A history of the last oracle, a woman named Alara who had lived 3 centuries ago. Alara had been powerful, capable of healing mortal wounds with a touch of binding feral wolves back to sanity. She had been revered, and the packs had brought her tribute and knelt at her feet. But power without wisdom had corrupted her. She had begun using her gifts to control instead of heal. She had turned alphas into puppets, had bent entire packs to her will. In the end, 5 packs had united to execute her, terrified of what she had become. They had burned her alive and sworn to kill any oracle who emerged. But the bloodline had not died. It had simply gone dormant, hiding in the genetics of normal wolves, waiting for the right combination to resurface. Isla closed the book slowly. She was an oracle. She had power, real power, power to heal or destroy, to save or corrupt. She thought about Alara, about how absolute power had twisted her, and felt a dark part of her soul whisper that she could make them pay, could make her parents kneel and beg. The thought terrified her more than anything else. She had to tell Cain. But as she gathered the tome, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Isla shoved the book under her dress, pressing it against her stomach, and turned to face the archive entrance just as 3 figures appeared. Dravenstone stood at the center, his amber eyes cold. To his left and right stood 2 other wolves, their expressions hostile. "Well," Draven said softly, the little null buried in dusty books, hiding from the real wolves. Isla's heart hammered, and she felt the hard edge of the tome pressing against her skin. "I'm just doing the work you assigned me," she said. "Of course you are, obedient little southerner." Draven circled her slowly. "Tell me, Isla Thornwell, have you enjoyed the king's protection these past weeks? The luxury chambers, the fine food?" "I didn't ask for any of it." "No, but you accepted it quickly enough." He stopped directly in front of her. "I know what you are. You're a trap, a pretty little weakness sent to distract our king. Your father sent you here deliberately." "That's not true. My father sold me to Aldrich Crow to be hunted. He wanted me dead. Or he wanted us to think that." Draven's hand shot out, gripping her throat, lifting her to her toes. Not choking her, not yet, but the threat was clear. "I intercepted a message 3 days ago. Your father, Lord Silas, is marching north with Aldrich Crow's army. 500 wolves and 100 human mercenaries with silver weapons. They will reach our southern pass in 2 days." The tome slipped slightly, and Isla pressed her arm against her stomach to hold it in place. "I know nothing about an army, I swear it." "It doesn't matter," Draven interrupted. "True or not, you are the weakness the king cannot afford, and I will not let sentiment destroy everything we have built here." His other hand moved to his belt, and Isla saw the glint of silver, a dagger coated in the metal that was poison to lichens and deadly to humans. "I will kill you tonight. Dump your body in the glacier. And when the king asks, I will tell him you fled back to your family. He will march south and destroy Silas and Aldrich, and Frostcrown will be secure." The dagger rose silver, gleaming. Isla felt something inside her chest crack open, some doors she had not known existed slamming wide. Terror flooded through her, but beneath it something else. Something that had been sleeping for 20 years. No, she whispered. Draven lunged. Isla threw her hands forward, palms out, and screamed. The sound that filled the archive was not her voice. It was the sound of reality itself shattering. A wave of violet and silver energy erupted from her outstretched hands so bright it turned the dim archive to blazing noon, so powerful it made the ancient stone walls tremble. The concussive force hit Draven square in the chest and lifted him entirely off his feet. He flew backward, crashing through one shelf and then another before slamming into the far wall with enough force to crack the stone. The silver dagger flew from his hand, and as it tumbled through the air, Isla's power touched it. The metal superheated instantly, glowing white hot, then melting into liquid slag that splattered across the floor. Draven's hand blistered and burned, and his scream of agony echoed through the catacombs. The two wolves who had accompanied him stumbled backward, terror on their faces, and then they ran. Isla collapsed to her knees, gasping. Her veins glowed beneath her skin, pulsing with violet and silver light. The tome fell from beneath her dress and hit the stone floor with a heavy thud. She stared at her hands, at the energy still crackling between her fingers. She was an oracle, and her power had just saved her life. The doors to the archive exploded inward, blown entirely off their hinges. Splinters of oak rained down, and through the ruined entrance stepped Cain Wolfe. He had not shifted, but his aura filled the chamber, suffocating and absolute. The temperature dropped to absolute zero in seconds. Frost exploded across the walls in jagged patterns. His crimson eyes swept the room, and though Isla knew he could not see clearly, his beast was reading everything through scent and sound. He smelled the melted silver, the blood, the ozone sharp tang of raw magic. And beneath it all, Isla's scent, terrified and powerful and alive. His gaze found Draven crumpled against the cracked wall, and the sound that emerged from the king's throat was not human. It was a wolf's snarl compressed into a man's chest. Draven, Cain's voice shook loose stones from the ceiling. You raise silver in my halls. Draven tried to speak, coughing blood. My king, sire, she is a spy. Lord Silas marches. I was protecting. You brought poison near my mate. The word hung in the air. Mate, not prisoner, not guest. Mate. Draven's eyes widened in true terror. No, sire, she is a null. She cannot be. Cain crossed the distance in 3 strides and grabbed Draven by the front of his armor, lifting the beta into the air with one hand. She is mine, and for your treason you are stripped of rank, name, and pack. You will be cast into the glacier of the damned, where you will freeze for eternity, fully aware, fully alive. He threw Draven toward the entrance where royal guards had gathered. Take this filth out of my sight. As the screaming traitor was dragged away, Cain turned toward Isla. The suffocating aura vanished instantly, replaced by vulnerability. Fear, not for himself, but for her. He dropped to his knees on the cold stone floor and reached out with trembling hands. Isla, are you harmed? No, she whispered. I'm not harmed, but I did something. I don't know what I did, but Her words cut off as he pulled her against his chest, his massive arms wrapping around her, one hand cradling the back of her head. He held her like she was the most precious thing in existence. I felt it, he said into her hair. A surge of power that made every wolf in the citadel drop to their knees. I knew it was you. I knew you were in danger. And I have never run so fast in my life, never been so terrified that I would arrive too late. Isla pulled back just enough to reach for the fallen tome. She pressed it into his arms. I found something. I found the truth. I'm not cursed, Cain. I'm not broken. I'm an oracle. His blind eyes widened. The old bloodline, the legends, they were real. I'm real. This power is real, and I'm terrified of it. There was another oracle 300 years ago. She went mad with power, became a tyrant. What if I become like her? Cain's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. You have endured 20 years of cruelty and remained kind. You have had every reason to become bitter, vengeful, twisted by pain, and yet you sit here weeping because you fear your own potential for darkness. His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. That fear, that awareness is the very thing that will keep you from Alar's fate. Power does not corrupt the pure Isla. It only reveals what was always there, and what is in you is light. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the power thrumming through her veins would not destroy who she was. Train me, she said suddenly. You mastered a body that should have killed you. You built strength from weakness. Teach me discipline. Teach me control. A slow smile crossed Cain's face, fierce and proud. Yes, I will teach you everything I know. And together we will discover what an oracle truly is when she chooses wisdom over tyranny. He stood pulling her to her feet, and for the first time since the shadow market, Isla felt something she had never experienced before. Hope. The power flowed through Isla's fingertips like liquid starlight, violet and silver threads weaving through the air before dissipating. She held the energy for 3 seconds before her knees buckled and exhaustion slammed into her. Cain caught her before she hit the training room floor. Better. You held it twice as long as yesterday. 2 weeks had passed since Draven's betrayal had awakened her oracle power. 2 weeks of training in a sealed chamber deep within Frostcrown's foundations. 2 weeks of learning to summon and control the devastating force that lived inside her. And 2 weeks of falling deeper in love with a blind king who looked at her like she was the sun itself. Isla leaned against Cain's chest, breathing hard. His hand stroked her white hair gently. These quiet moments after training had become sacred to them both. The army, she said softly. How much longer? 2 days, perhaps less. Cain's voice rumbled through his chest. Our scouts confirmed 500 wolves from Crestfall and Thornvale territories, plus 100 Iron Fang mercenaries equipped with silver weapons. They are led by your father and Aldrich Crow. Isla closed her eyes. Her father marching to war. There is something else, Cain continued. The mercenaries have ballistas, 3 of them. The bolts are silver-tipped, designed to kill alphas at 300 yards. And they have been instructed to target me specifically. Ice flooded Isla's veins. They know about your blindness. Perhaps, or perhaps they simply see killing the alpha as the fastest route to victory. His jaw tightened. Either way, I cannot lead from the rear. My wolves need to see their king fight. But if those bolts, then you will stop them. He cupped her face in his scarred hands. Your oracle power can transmute matter, Isla. You turned silver to slag when Draven attacked you. In battle, you will turn their weapons to dust. Together, we are unstoppable. Together, the words sent warmth through her chest. Let me try once more, she said. A smile touched Cain's lips. You need to rest. Power without wisdom is tyranny. Remember. He lifted her into his arms, ignoring her protests. Sleep. Tomorrow we march to war. Tonight I want you safe and whole. He carried her to her chambers in the East Wing, which had somehow become their chambers over the past 2 weeks. Most nights he stayed sitting by her fireplace, after training, reading reports aloud while she recovered. Some nights she would read to him from ancient texts, her voice filling the space between them. And some nights, like the one 3 days ago, he would pull her close on the fur rug before the fire and kiss her until the world disappeared and nothing existed except his mouth on hers, his hands mapping her body, learning her through touch in ways his eyes never could. They had not yet consummated their bond. Cain had been clear that he would not take that final step until she was certain, until she chose him, not because he had saved her, but because she wanted him with the same desperate intensity he wanted her. She was certain. She had been certain for days. But tonight was not the time. Tonight, war was coming. Cain set her gently on her bed and brushed a kiss against her forehead. Sleep, little bird. I will see you at dawn. Cain, she called as he turned to leave. He paused, waiting. When this is over, when we have won, and my father has been defeated, I want to take the final step. I want to be yours completely. She saw his shoulders tense, saw his hands clench. When he spoke, his voice was rough with barely controlled desire. When this is over, I will claim you so thoroughly that every wolf in North America will know you are mine. That is a promise, Isla Thornwell, and I will always keep my promises. He left before she could respond. The dawn came too quickly. Isla dressed in reinforced leather armor, designed for mobility, lined with fur against the cold. Over it, she wore a cloak of midnight blue that Mira had embroidered with silver thread in patterns that looked like constellations. You look like an oracle, Mira said softly, like the warriors of old who fought beside their mates and turned the tide of impossible battles. I'm terrified, Isla admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Mira pressed something into Isla's hand. A small dagger, the hilt wrapped in leather. You are an oracle child, and your power is formidable. But power can be exhausted. If it comes to close quarters, do not hesitate. The army assembled in the courtyard as the sun crept above the eastern peaks. 500 Frostcrown wolves, the finest warriors in the northern territories. Isla saw faces she had come to recognize: Rowan, the new beta who had shown her respect. Captain Senna, a fierce female alpha. Young scouts who looked at Isla with awe. The pack had changed toward her. Not all of them, not yet, but enough. They had felt her power that night in the archives. and they had seen their king claim her as mate. Cain emerged from the great hall, wearing full battle armor, dark steel etched with frost runes that glowed faintly blue. His white hair was tied back, revealing the strong lines of his face, the scars that marked him as a survivor. He looked every inch the Winter King, and when he swung onto his massive black destrier, the assembled army roared. He extended his hand down to Isla, and she took it, letting him pull her up to sit before him. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The king riding to war with his oracle mate, united unbreakable. They rode south through mountain passes choked with snow, through forests of pine, through valleys where their breath steamed in the frigid air. The journey took 2 days. On the second night, they camped in a sheltered ravine within sight of the southern pass. Tomorrow they would meet the enemy. Tomorrow blood would stain the snow. Isla stood at the edge of the swamp, looking south toward the pass where her father's army waited. She felt Cain approach, felt the warmth of his presence at her back. His arms came around her waist, pulling her against his chest. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of death, not of defeat, but of losing you." Isla turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the hard line of his jaw. "You won't lose me. We fight together, remember. Or fall together," he murmured. She pulled his head down and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that contact. Love and fear and desperation and hope all tangled together. He responded with equal intensity, his hands fisting in her cloak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isla whispered against his lips, "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise," Cain said. "No matter what it costs, I will come back to you." They made love that night in his command tent, urgent and desperate and achingly tender all at once. He learned her body with his hands and mouth, bringing her to heights of pleasure she had never imagined. And when he finally claimed her completely, Isla felt their bond snap into place like a lock finding its key. The mating mark he left on her shoulder burned with sacred fire, and she marked him in return, her oracle power flowing through the bite to seal them together. They were one now, in this life and whatever came after. The dawn broke gray and cold over the southern pass. The battlefield was a killing ground, a narrow valley flanked by sheer cliffs of ice and stone. Aldrich Crow's forces held the high ground, their 500 wolves arrayed in disciplined ranks. Behind them, the Iron Fang mercenaries crouched behind their ballistas. And in the center, protected by an armored carriage, Isla saw 2 figures. Lord Silas Thornwell and Lady Margot, her parents watching like spectators rather than commanders. Cowards. Even now, they hid behind others. Cain's forces deployed with precision. Senna's vanguard took position on the left flank. Rowan's reserve held the center, and Cain himself would lead the main assault. Isla rode beside him on a gray mare, 50 elite guards surrounding her. She was not a warrior, but she was their oracle, and her power would turn this battle. It had to. Across the valley, a horn blew. The enemy line surged forward, 500 wolves shifting mid-charge into their beast forms. The sound was deafening. Aldrich led them, a massive brown wolf, his jaws foaming with bloodlust. Cain's response was a single word. "Hold!" The Frostcrown line did not move, stood in perfect discipline as the enemy closed the distance. 500 yards, 400, 300. "Now!" The mercenary captain's voice carried, and the ballistas fired. 30 silver-tipped bolts arced through the gray dawn sky, and every single one was aimed at the cluster of riders where Cain's white hair marked him like a beacon. Isla threw her hands toward the sky and screamed. The oracle's song erupted from her throat, a sound that was not quite music and not quite speech, but something fundamental, something that resonated with the bones of the world itself. Violet and silver energy exploded from her outstretched palms, forming a wave that rippled across the battlefield. Where the wave touched the descending bolts, reality rewrote itself. The silver underwent instantaneous alchemical transmutation, the blessed metal transforming into base lead. The structural integrity collapsed. 30 bolts shattered into harmless fragments that scattered across the snow like hail. The enemy charge faltered. Magic. They had not expected magic. Isla did not stop. She pulled deeper on the power thrumming through her veins, pulled until her body glowed with bioluminescent light, until her eyes blazed like stars. The second pulse of energy was golden rather than violet, warm rather than cold. It washed across the Frostcrown forces like a wave of summer sun, and where it touched wounded flesh, injuries knitted, cuts sealed, broken bones fused. The Frostcrown army roared as one, and then Cain shifted. The transformation was terrible and beautiful. Bones cracked and reformed his body, expanding, white fur erupting as his human form gave way to the beast beneath. In seconds, a colossal direwolf stood where the king had been easily 8 feet at the shoulder, his fur pure white, his eyes blazing crimson. For the first time in his life fighting in full daylight, Cain could see perfectly. Isla's healing had extended to his wolf, had cured the blindness. He could see the battlefield with crystalline clarity. He charged and his army charged with him. The two forces met in the center of the valley with a crash like thunder. Wolves tore into each other with fang and claw, the snow turning red within seconds. Isla watched from her position on the ridge, her guards forming a protective circle, and focused everything she had on supporting Cain's forces. Another pulse of healing energy. Another transmutation of incoming silver weapons. Her power flowed like water, like breath. Cain was a god of war made flesh. He tore through the enemy line with brutal efficiency. In 90 seconds, he killed 8 wolves, each death swift and certain. The enemy scattered before him, terrified of the white demon that could see in daylight. Aldrich Crow saw his line breaking and made a desperate decision. He shifted back to human form, grabbed a fallen mercenary's sword, and charged directly at Cain. The duel lasted 30 seconds. Aldrich was strong-skilled. But he was fighting a king who could finally see who had spent 8 years learning to fight blind and now possessed perfect vision. Cain shifted mid-combat, his human hands closing around Aldrich's sword arm, and with a single brutal wrench, snapped the bone. Aldrich screamed. The sword fell. Cain's other hand shot out and gripped the back of Aldrich's neck. One sharp twist and the sound of breaking vertebrae echoed across the suddenly silent battlefield. Aldrich Crow's body dropped into the blood-stained snow, lifeless. The enemy line shattered. 250 wolves turned and fled. The mercenaries threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Victory crystallized in a single perfect moment. But Isla's attention had already shifted, because they're attempting to flee in the armored carriage were Lord Silas and Lady Margot Thornwell. "Stop them!" Isla's voice rang with oracle authority amplified by power until it shook the valley walls. 50 Frostcrown guards surged forward, surrounding the carriage, forcing it to halt. They dragged her parents out and threw them to their knees in the bloody snow. Isla dismounted from her mare and walked slowly across the battlefield toward them. The fighting had stopped. Every wolf still standing turned to watch. This was not about territory, this was about justice. Lord Silas looked up as she approached, and for the first time in her life, Isla saw fear in her father's eyes. "Isla, daughter, thank the goddess you are alive. We came to rescue you, to free you from silence." The word cracked like a whip and Silas's mouth snapped shut. Isla stood before her parents, her white hair lifting in an unfelt wind, her eyes blazing with violet and silver light. "You came to kill me," she said quietly, and her voice carried to every corner of the valley. "Dravenstone intercepted your message. You marched north not to rescue, but to eliminate the witness to your crimes." "No," Margot whispered. "We are your parents. We love—" Isla placed her glowing hands on their foreheads, and the lie died on Margot's lips. This was oracle magic at its most invasive. The power to compel truth, to strip away every defense and leave only naked honesty. Her parents' eyes went wide with horror as they felt the spell take hold. "Did you ever love me?" Isla asked, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Silas's answer was torn from his throat against his will. "No, you were a disappointment from the moment you failed to shift. An embarrassment. A stain on our perfect bloodline." Margot's compelled answer followed. "I wished you had died in childbirth so I could try again for a real daughter. Having you survive was the goddess's cruelest joke." The assembled wolves, even the enemies, drew back in horror. To hear parents speak such words about their child was obscene, unnatural. "Why did you sell me?" Isla's voice broke on the question. "Aldrich's debt was trivial," Silas said, fighting the words even as they spilled out. "We sold you because you were worthless. Because your white hair and demon eyes made us the laughingstock of society. Because every day you existed reminded everyone that the mighty Thornwell bloodline had produced a null. When you watched the cart take me away," Isla turned to her mother, "when I looked up at you on that balcony and you turned your back, what did you feel?" Margot's face crumpled, but the truth came anyway. Relief, pure relief, like a tumor had been cut from my body. "I went inside and drank wine and celebrated being free of you at last." The silence that followed was absolute. Isla stood before her parents, their confessions hanging in the frozen air, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not her heart breaking. That had happened years ago. This was different. This was the final severance of every thread that had ever connected her to these people. "You valued pure like and blood above all else," she said softly. "You despised me for being different. So let us see how you fare without yours." She drove her oracle power into their spiritual cores. The magic burned like white fire, seeking out the connection between human and wolf. She found the threads of power that linked her parents to their beasts and gripped them with hands made of light and fury. And she ripped them out. Silas and Margot screamed. The sound was inhuman animal, the agony of having their very souls torn in half. Their bodies convulsed foam flecking their lips as the lichen strength that had defined them for 5 decades burned away like paper in a furnace. Their healing factor collapsed. Their enhanced senses dimmed. The connection to the pack mind, to the moon's pull, to the ancient beast that made them superior to mere humans, severed completely. When the spell released them, they collapsed face first into the snow, gasping and broken. They were human now. Null. The very thing they had despised their daughter for being. Isla stood over their broken forms, her hands still glowing. You are hereby stripped of your lichen nature, your pack, affiliation, your titles and lands. You are banished to live as powerless nulls. You will endure the humiliation, the rejection, the shame you inflicted on me for 20 years. And you will do so, knowing you brought this fate upon yourselves. She turned to the assembled Frostcrown guards. Take them to the southern territory's nearest settlement. Leave them with the clothes on their backs and nothing more. As her parents were dragged away, still too weak to even stand, Isla felt no satisfaction, no joy, just a hollow sense of completion. Cain shifted back to human form, appeared at her side. His hand found hers warm and solid. It is done, he said quietly. Yes? Isla turned to face him, to face the 1,000 wolves watching. It is done. Cain raised his voice, projecting to every corner of the valley. Frostcrown, you have witnessed the power of the oracle. She is my mate, chosen by my beast, claimed by my heart. From this day forward, she is your Luna, your queen. He pulled Isla close and bit down on her shoulder, his fangs breaking skin, marking her publicly. The mating claim was visible, undeniable, sacred. When he released, her blood trickled down her collarbone. She turned to the assembled masses and let her oracle power blaze in her eyes. I am Isla Wolfe, Oracle Queen of Frostcrown. I vow to protect this pack and to heal the wounded, to speak truth to power, and to destroy any who threaten our home. The Frostcrown army roared approval, fists over hearts falling to one knee in the snow. And then something unexpected happened. The surviving enemy wolves, those who had fled and been captured, those who had surrendered when Aldrich fell, they too began to kneel. One by one they bared their throats in submission. An older wolf, a captain from the Crestfall forces, spoke for them all. We served tyrants who valued power over justice. We watched Aldrich hunt innocents for sport and did nothing. If the Oracle Queen will have us, we pledge ourselves to Frostcrown, to a pack that values truth and protects the powerless. Isla looked to Cain, silently asking permission. He smiled, fierce and proud. Frostcrown welcomes all who pledge loyalty and truth. We are not conquerors, but protectors. 300 enemy wolves pledged allegiance that day. Frostcrown's territory expanded to encompass the southern lands, and the pack swelled to over 1,000 strong. But Isla barely heard the celebrations. Exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and her knees buckled. Cain caught her before she fell, lifting her into his arms, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was his face, his crimson eyes blazing with love and pride and relief. When Isla woke, 6 months had passed in what felt like heartbeats. She opened her eyes to find herself in the master chambers of Frostcrown Citadel, in the massive bed she now shared with Cain. Spring sunlight streamed through the windows. Cain sat beside her, his hand holding hers. Welcome back, little bird. What, how long? You pushed your oracle power beyond its limits. Your body needed time to recover. He brushed her white hair back. Mira said it was like your spirit had left your body and needed to find its way home. But she promised you would wake when you were ready. Isla sat up slowly. Her body felt strange, different, heavier. She looked down and gasped. Her belly curved outward beneath the silk nightgown, unmistakably pregnant. 4 months along, perhaps more. We created life on the night before battle, Cain said softly, his hand moving to rest on the swell of her stomach. Our child grows strong. Mira says the heartbeat is steady, powerful. They are ours and they are perfect. Tears streamed down Isla's face as she covered his hand with her own. A baby. We're having a baby. Yes, and you are going to be a magnificent mother. He leaned in his forehead, resting against hers. I was terrified. 6 months of watching you sleep, not knowing if you would wake, if our child would ever know their mother. But you are strong, Isla. She kissed him, then deep and desperate and full of joy. Over the next hours, Cain filled her in on everything she had missed. The reformation of Frostcrown's government, the creation of the Council of Equals, where alphas, betas, and omegas all had equal votes. The establishment of the Oracle Healing Temple, where Isla's 12 apprentices were learning to channel power for medicine rather than war. The orphanages and schools built in the former Crestfall and Thornvale territories, and the fate of Dravenstone still frozen in the Glacier of the Damned, but scheduled for release in 9.5 years, his sentence reduced because Isla had advocated for mercy. And Edmund, Isla's younger brother, now 17, and stripped of the arrogance their parents had instilled in him. He had arrived at Frostcrown 3 months prior, seeking asylum after the Thornwell estate collapsed. Isla had granted it, but with conditions. He would train with the Omegas, learn humility, earn his place through service rather than birthright. He was in the training yard now, working beside wolves who would have been beneath him in the old world. She had forgiven him, eventually recognizing that he had been as much a victim of their parents' poison as she had been. But forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant giving him the chance to become better. "You have changed everything," Cain said, "not through force but through example, showing that power can heal instead of harm. That justice can include mercy." "We changed things together," Isla corrected. "I would be nothing without you. You would be magnificent without me, but I am grateful beyond words that you chose to be magnificent with me instead." That evening, they stood on the balcony of the master chambers, looking out over the valley city below. The northern lights danced overhead, violet and silver and crimson, the colors of oracle power and wolf blood intertwined. 2,000 Frostcrown wolves had gathered in the main square, their howls of celebration rising to meet the stars. Isla's hand rested on her swelling belly, feeling the flutter of life within. Cain's arms wrapped around her from behind his warmth, a shield against the spring chill. And for the first time in her 20 years of existence, Isla Wolfe felt complete. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you," Cain rumbled against her hair. "My oracle, my mate, my queen, my home." In the distance, a messenger arrived at the gates, exhausted from hard riding. He carried news from the Canadian territories. Another white-haired girl had been discovered, 16 years old, her eyes violet and gold, no wolf to call her own. The oracle bloodlines were awakening across the continent, dormancy ending, the goddess's correction beginning. But that was a story for tomorrow. Tonight was for celebration, for love, for the family they had built from the ashes of cruelty and pain. Tonight, the rejected daughter who had been sold for being different stood as a queen and oracle, a mother-to-be surrounded by a pack who would die to protect her. And somewhere in the slums of the Southern Territories, Lord Silas and Lady Margot Thornwell huddled in the cold, begging for scraps, powerless and forgotten, living out the karma they had earned through 20 years of cruelty. Justice had come at last, not through vengeance but through truth, not through destruction but through transformation. The Oracle Age had begun, and Isla Wolfe stood at its center, ready to guide her people into a future where power served wisdom and strength protected the weak. The Winter King and his Oracle Queen ruled the North together, their love a legend that would echo through 500 years of history. And they lived, if not happily ever after, then purposefully, powerfully, completely. The end was just the beginning.